Welcome to today's episode of MicroConf On Air. I'm your host, Rob Walling. Today, Asia Matos and I are going to talk about how to acquire your first 100 customers, kicking off from her MicroConf starter talk from last year. And don't worry if you haven't seen the talk, I'll be doing a quick recap of it towards the top of the interview. Obviously, if you're in microconfconnect.com or in MicroConf Connect, which is our Slack channel, you can ask questions. And microconfonair.com if you just want to watch the live stream. If you miss any of these episodes and you want to see them asynchronously, MicroConf On Air is now a podcast. And so you can head to iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, all the places that you would listen to a podcast, Overcast, Downcast. Search for MicroConf On Air, and these episodes come out a couple times a week. I actually just listened back to the one with Cortland Allen last week. It turned out really good. As always, thank you to Basecamp and Stripe, our partners, our headline partners this year, and Asia Matos Arangio. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure.
So Asia and I were talking before we started the live stream, and she got married last year, and so she's going by Asia Arangio. But I will start calling you that eventually. But right now, I'm still holding on to Matos. It's just too much of a shock to my system to switch live.
I feel you. Same, honestly. I'm still getting used to it.
Yeah, totally. So Asia is the founder of Demand Maven. That's at demandmaven.io. It's a demand generation agency and marketing strategy agency for startups. And Asia was gracious enough to speak at MicroConf Starter last year. Her talk title was obviously How to Acquire Your First 100 Customers, which is the topic we're going to talk about today. And again, if you haven't seen the talk, we're going to cover enough background about that. But Asia has some really cool insights because she works with a lot of different companies, and she has a unique advantage that a lot of individual founders don't have when you're just looking at your own company, your own strategy, and she's thinking at like that next level up. So I wanted to kick us off. And Asia asked, you mentioned that you've been kind of giving advice and thinking through strategy with the startups that you're work with clients in essence. So I'm wondering, what advice have you been giving? And obviously, you can speak in generality, so it's not to give away, proprietary information or whatever. But what advice have you been given to startups about how to think about the future, given the current state of the world with the recession and the global pandemic?
Yeah, of course. It's an excellent question, and it's one that I'm lucky to be able to provide some perspective on. But the top two things that come to mind, the first is what has shifted from a market and just an overall customer perspective. Because if you're listening to this, I'm assuming you're a SaaS founder in some kind of way. There is a great chance that something behaviorally has shifted for your customers, and an even greater chance that the value proposition of what your product ultimately or service ultimately offers to those customers has also likely shifted. A great example of this is actually, I do have a client where we, in the past, even just like 4 to 5 weeks in our sales conversations with prospects and customers, we noticed that before all of our market messaging, everything that we've ever said about the product was all about ROI and getting the best bang for your buck. And ever since, unfortunately, recession and pandemic has happened, now that the value has changed for the customer, now they care so much more about having control, being able to see the future, mitigating risk as much as possible. So we went back to the product and all of our marketing messaging and just double checked to make sure that we weren't tone deaf. I think that's going to be the biggest thing. It's the best advice I can give in terms of what are you saying, and is that different for your customers now? And the only way to know that is, of course, by talking to them, talking to prospects, and really digging deep into what's changed. I think that the second thing, though, is so aside from value propositions shifting, there's also like the behavioral aspect. The way that a customer finds you, is that now different? So where someone might be searching for you before, are they searching different things now? That is another like behavioral aspect of how they find you, how they actually become customers. And there's actually the one last thing I will leave you with. I think now more than ever, the time is now to be a painkiller as opposed to being a vitamin. What I mean by that is your product, you're likely in one of two categories. You're likely solving and killing pain for people, or you are kind of like a vitamin, in which case you're selling a better version of people, of themselves. So if you think about why you would buy a painkiller versus a vitamin. Now more than ever, though, I think it's going to be critical and imperative that products really get to the meat and bones of like, are they actually killing pain for people, and has the pain changed? Has it shifted? And again, the only way to know that is, of course, to continue customer research, to continue talking to customers and just validating what it is that you're seeing. But I think that that's the other third thing that we've been just making sure that we really understand and that we are pretty dialed in on.
I think that's good. I think the term tone deaf is something that people should be thinking about, and even like you said, revisiting old marketing messaging. I think is important.
Oh yeah.
So I want to give a quick summary of your talk. The high level pieces, and you can fill in anything that I missed, but the high level pieces are, you said fundamentally there are two aspects of marketing. The first is the customer journey isn't linear. People need time to decide, compare, and ultimately commit to your product. And the second is focus on the bottom of your funnel first. What does someone do right before they start looking for a solution to their pain? Tackle that channel first. And you talk about like how top of funnel activity is all about awareness and attracting people. Bottom of the funnel is about mindset, right? People who are here are more interested in solving their pain. And then you went through a couple case studies. One was, I like this because it gave concrete examples. It's a case study with pain therapists, and the top of funnel search terms that they might target were, I think they were an actual client of yours. It was how to become a therapist, how to build a private practice in therapy. The middle of the funnel, how to choose an amazing clinical supervisor, and the bottom of the funnel is online clinical supervisors for LMFT in Georgia, right? So it just gets more and more specific, and the volume of traffic at the bottom of the funnel is always going to be less than the top, but there's so much more intent and so much more likely to convert. And you also talked about, you brought jobs to be done in, doing interviews to get kind of customer prospect words. And if we use acronyms during this, or abbreviations during this conversation, TOFU is top of funnel, MOFU is middle of funnel, and BOFU is bottom of the funnel. Anything I missed off the top of your head?
Yeah. Honestly, I feel like that was an amazing recap.
Oh, nice.
I'm trying to think if there's anything that I would add to that. I think that I think that you hit the nail on the head in terms of the main points. The only thing I would add is just really dialing in on what is that phase, that weird spot between like they're super unaware about your product and then I've got a problem, like I want to solve it, and how do I do that? That's something that from a talk perspective, I'm learning at least that focusing on that gray area and really getting, I hate to say black and white, but getting super black and white about like focusing on the unaware people versus the aware people. You want to be on the aware side if you possibly can. The unaware, it's a lot of effort, but anyway, I digress. But no, that was great.
And that's cool. And that harkens back to like the Eugene Schwartz, the 5 phases of awareness, where it's like not problem aware and then problem aware. Maybe problem aware is the first one. And then it's problem unaware, problem aware, solution aware, product aware. I think Google them, yeah. Eugene Schwartz 5. But that really ties into that. The other thing that you talked about that I missed is, I like the way you talked about marketing strategy. You were like, look, there's really just 3 ways to look at marketing. Owned media, which are the channels in the media you own, right? So this is your website and your brand social media channels and landing pages. Earned media, which are channels of media that you've earned from others. So this is referrals, links, other people writing about you, reviews, press, all that stuff. And then there's paid media, which is obviously just AdWords, Facebook ads, all the paid acquisition, even Capterra, LinkedIn, and that type of stuff. So that's a nice way to frame it as well when you think about it. I'm curious, so, you gave your talk just about a year ago, almost to the day, I think, within 2 weeks of a year ago. Have you rethought or made any specific improvements or adjustments to your approach since then? Yeah.
The approach is still very much the same. In terms of how do we figure out what are the right channels? How do we really understand the customer journey? And how do we figure out how to know what we ultimately don't know about the way our customers think about the product, the problem they're trying to solve, the solution? That I would say is actually the exact same. Now, how I educate on that has changed. So my talks, I think now, are so much more focused on really walking people through the process of demand gen and really doing that on their own. And yes, like we still talk about the customer journey, we still talk about the channels, and we still talk about how do you craft that strategy. But I think now more than ever, what I'm finding is founders really just want to know like what is step one, step two, step three. So we've really kind of gone more into that. Okay, so with all of this knowledge about how to like actually think about this, what are those steps with the right context at least? And so the talk itself has shifted more on those steps and the background knowledge that you'll need to successfully take those steps and take those measures and feel good about what it is that you're doing. But I would say the process, honestly, is the same. I don't know that at least, even like from a client perspective, I think that the biggest thing is we focus on what are the growth experiments that we want to run, what are the tests that we want to run, knowing that if you've never done marketing before, then everything is going to be a test. You know, we really won't know until we try it. But we make the absolute best educated guesses that we possibly can with the research that we have. And we learn tons. And usually what ends up happening is we come out of on the other side with some kind of campaign or set of channels that ultimately do work. And that's, you know, obviously the goal. That's what everyone wants to accomplish, which is a huge win for me as well.
Right, and that's the difference between, or one of the differences between strategies and tactics is you talked a lot about high-level strategy, high-level ways of thinking, and those don't really change over time. You know, maybe over about 20, 30 years they might, but in a year, the strategies you outlined are still, they're going to hold true for a long time. You also, in your talk, talked about, you know, you listed a bunch of marketing channels, organic search, paid search, paid ads like Facebook, Twitter, AdRoll, video and audio, like YouTube, podcasts, social media, communities like Reddit, referrals, word of mouth, events, conferences, review sites like Capterra and G2 Crowd, publications like Medium, et cetera. And there's a bunch. I mean, we could probably list 20, 25 off the top of our head here. I'm curious today, like what handful do you see working? And whether, you know, I realize that we're in a pandemic and that's, you know, that kind of colors this conversation, but you know, I'm curious to hear again, given that you have that unique advantage of being able to see across many, you know, many companies. I'm curious what you see working.
Yeah, I can tell you the ones that we almost always test over and over again, and the ones that work. If there's one thing I wish I could have really drilled down into during that talk, it's really that at the end of the day. Marketing, demand gen growth, whatever you want to call it, it really doesn't care about what channels you use so long as it gives you the desired result. So if content marketing works for you and like that's the jam and it does the thing, awesome. If Facebook ads do the thing for you and like that's what gives you results, awesome. But I will say that across the board, the things that almost always come up, we almost always look at what does either organic search or paid search look like. We almost always test Facebook and sometimes LinkedIn. It just really depends on the audience. But we've been able to see some pretty good results from Facebook, specifically on the retargeting end. And the third thing, and this is something that might make some founders cringe, but outbound prospecting, honestly. And that might not necessarily be something that I myself do, but how like enabling the founder to actually put out messaging to send, whether they're LinkedIn InMails at scale or emails at scale. Those are really the three things that we almost always test, and usually we'll see some pulse on. Paid search, I would say, is another one of those opportunities. On the organic side, like on the free, like we're not paying, we're really just spending time. We almost always look at what are the communities out there or conferences out there that we might not have tapped yet that we can. And sometimes that actually even includes like helping the founder build like a personal brand in a way, and helping, you know, find the voice. Sometimes that's part of it. But yeah, I would say that those are the channels that historically have proven. What my guess though, moving forward, even with the pandemic, is that paid advertising in general will likely get a lot cheaper for some, not all. Some markets, it's going to be the same. And it's probably going to be even more ungodly. But I think some paid channels for some markets will likely actually decrease in price, and it'll get a little bit cheaper to try those.
Yep, I think that makes a lot of sense. The thing, you know, as I'm looking across 30-something companies that I've invested in and then I have conversations with, everything you've said these are always the kind of the first things to test. The things I'm seeing working are I always have people get retargeting set up, whether they're going to do it in Google or Facebook, depending on where their audience is. Integrations are a big one.
Yeah.
Integrating with whoever. You look at who I like to think about who's before you and who's after you in terms of the kind of what your customers are doing. Sorry, somebody's texting me and distracting me. But who's before you and after you in your customer's process? So, like an example I like to use is if I'm an email service provider, right before me is landing pages, and right after an email capture of some kind, like an opt-in monster, and then after me tends to be usually some type of commerce, like a shopping cart, whether that's SendOwl or Gumroad or even Shopify, right? And so it's like you integrate with folks who are before you and after you, and then try to get that promotion because they tend to have shared customer bases. And then cold email is one that works for a lot of people. And I know it's like you said, it's controversial, and maybe it's not for you, but it definitely works in a lot of spaces. And then trade shows and events, especially for folks with the high price points. If you're going after Fortune 1000, Fortune 5000, like that's where it's crazy, but there's so much value in meeting folks in person.
Yes.
And for folks who want to build the self-service, $20 a month SaaS app, then trade shows and events are probably not for you. But if you have higher ticket prices, that's a big one.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like one of my favorite parts of your talk was you had this sentence on a slide, and you said you only need to answer the question, what did your prospect do to immediately solve their pain? That you find out what their pain is, and then you find out how they solved it, but what did they do to immediately solve their pain? And then you kind of give a list of options that potentially they could have done. I just want to call it out because it was just such a poignant part of your talk. Can you walk people through that thought process?
Yeah, absolutely. This is, it's a critical part of not just marketing, but it's also just your product and what is its place in the market and in the world, which is like, that existential question. But at the end, but from like a growth perspective and just a marketing perspective in general, the reason why that question is so critical to answer is because it likely points to channels and also competitive alternatives, whether that's an actual competitor or whether that's a behavior that they choose instead of using your product. And what I try to do from just like a strategy perspective is when we know what that is, whether that's they asked a friend or they searched or they decided to use a spreadsheet instead. Usually when those behaviors or next steps become critical or apparent, we can now actually craft entire go-to-market around what that typical behavior is. And there are going to be patterns over time. So the example that you gave earlier was actually from a client actually who I'm working with again now. They 30x'd in growth. They want to come back and they want to do it again, which is awesome. But when we identified the very critical behavior that every single therapist did the same exact step to find the alternative, then we said, okay, how do we build marketing around this pattern that they take every single time? And for us, that was organic search. And then also doubling that back up with paid search, since paid is a little bit faster, obviously, to rank, putting that in finger quotes. But that question is so critical to really understand, and then also to understand what is it that they're ultimately trying to solve and why. Because we can create content about that. We can insert ourselves into that funnel, if you will. And yeah, really truly knowing that and taking that to heart. And then how do we build marketing around that? That's really the secret sauce.
Excellent. We have a question from MicroConf Connect. If you are in MicroConf Connect and want to ask Asia a question, I'm only have one or two more for myself, so please chime in. The question is from Will Johnson, and he asks, to reach therapists, what was the approach? Was it cold calling, content marketing, others? And I'm curious to hear.
Okay, so I love this question because there's a few moments, I guess, or thoughts that immediately go into my head. But I think that the first thing is when you have an audience that you want to target, the first thing is, okay, well, why do you want to reach therapists? In our case, we didn't want to just reach therapists. We actually wanted to reach pre-licensed therapists, people who had either just graduated from college and or had graduated from college years ago, but they hadn't become a licensed therapist. And that's a very specific segment of the market, if you think about it. In terms of targeting blanket therapists, from my personal experience, they are likely in Facebook communities. They are also likely, there's a few different conferences and just associations that they follow and that they pay attention to. I don't know what your product is, but I can tell you, at least from what we unpacked and what we researched, pre-licensed therapists, first, the product offered online clinical supervision. So we wanted these pre-licensed therapists to use our product for online clinical supervision. The behavior that pre-licensed therapists have on average is, well, whenever they look for a clinical supervisor, they just go into Google and they just type in like their state, clinical supervision, and then whatever their credential licensure is. That was a behavior that we identified over and over and over again. Every single interview I did, it was the same pattern over and over again. So then we said, well, if they're all going into Google to search this, we should rank for that. So then we executed and built a scalable landing page strategy for every single state and licensure type, which that's like hundreds probably now of landing pages. We now, for some of those, we rank, and that's how really they find us. It's more of an inbound strategy. We did double that up with paid media just to make it happen a little bit faster, so we weren't like waiting around for SEO to kick in. But that's the context of that example. If I were to target therapists not knowing much else about them, I would say, well, for one, there's probably some behavior or thing that they're doing to get kind of close to what your product solves or does. But the second thing is they're likely in communities. They definitely follow like the AAMFT association. Like there's like a few conferences and associations that they're really dialed into. And also, depending on what kind of therapist, there's likely, I hate to say influencer, kind of like what they are. There are private practice therapists who teach others how to like run their own private practice. There's a few that come to mind, but there are influencers and bloggers in this space who talk about running, like becoming a therapist, like, you know, doing that and living that life. Those are people that we've tapped as well. So there's honestly tons. There's tons of content that you can create for therapists. I think inbound would be an incredible strategy for them. Cold calling and sales emails, I think, would be tougher. They are, I think, on the spectrum of like tech savviness. Most of them, I would say, are on the less tech savvy scale, maybe. So whatever it is that you do, I would make it as organic and like as genuine as possible, which makes me think cold calling and the cold emails, it hasn't really worked for us. Really, inbound has been where it's at. But that's my 2 cents on therapists.
Yep. Man, I love inbound. If you can make inbound work in your business, it's great. It just often takes a really long time if you don't have money to spend, you know, because
Exactly.
that organic and content just takes so long. There's a question from YouTube, and I'm not sure if this is not your area of expertise or if you haven't done this, that's fine. We can just pass it because I'm not sure that it's 100%, you know, in your wheelhouse, so to speak. But the question is, what's the best way to deal with rejection when cold calling?
I do have a little bit of experience with this. Purely because previous roles, and there's always like B2B versus B2C, and then there's you know, demo versus like fully self-service, freemium, etc. I've worked with sales teams, and I've also not, you know, like it's been all marketing, generating the free trials and the signups. So I've been on both worlds. But from a cold calling perspective, in terms of dealing with rejection, the first question that I would ask, and this is more of like I would ask myself this, but is it that the rejection is something that I know that I can counter, or am I just taking it personally? So I think if it's a question about taking it personally, that's just a you know, a sales grit kind of like over time you will be able to handle rejection better. If it's more of a I should be able to maybe checkmate the rejection, or really the objection is probably and try to unpack why is the rejection happening. What am I missing when I'm talking to this person, and what is it that I'm not conveying well enough? To me, it might actually be more of a communication or a messaging challenge. If you're getting like the constant rejection over and over and over again, I would actually approach it more of like a consulting call as opposed to a pure sales call, which is like buy my thing. I would approach it much more of like a, okay, well, tell me more about that. Why? Like, what's the thing that you're missing here? And if you find it's a lot of just like, well, you're calling me at the wrong time, or like it's, whatever. Well, there's ways that you can handle that. But then if you find that you're actually getting objections that maybe either your product just doesn't solve at all, or it's the wrong message entirely, and it could be either one. But that's typically how I've worked with sales teams in the past. Whenever we get a ton of rejection, we usually we reverse engineer. Okay, well, who did we actually call, and why? Did we like pause to ask why, or what's going on, or tell me more about why this is super uninteresting to you? And most people will be honest and tell you, especially to a salesperson. I feel like they hear it all. But when we do actually pause and approach it more of like a consultative approach, that's when we get all the insights that we need to really change our cold call approach and change our script if we're using a script, which you probably are. But yeah, that's my approach on how to handle that. But there's tons of sales resources on how to obviously do the cold calling thing really well. Yes.
Yeah, Google Stelly FD. Go to close.com, look at their blog, look at his ebooks, look at his YouTube videos. He'll nail that. That was good advice, though. Thank you.
Of course.
We have a couple more questions. We are running a little short on time. We got about 4 minutes left, but I think we can crank through these. So Pranay Pratik said, any suggestions on good channels for DevOps/developer tools? Early stage product, 6,000 to 10,000 annual contract value.
Okay, so I'm assuming that you are targeting developers, DevOps folks, and you're looking for channels to market to people through those channels. Okay. The developer mindset, and this is just from personal experience, is that they are just violently allergic to any pure forms of marketing unless it's really, really, really good. So what I find really works is Facebook ads are really tough. Things like advertisements digitally, at least in general, are kind of tough unless they are sometimes sponsored newsletters from really trusted, other technical people who run those newsletters. The other thing that comes to mind, communities in general. I find that developers love to share knowledge. So if you're brave enough and if you have something that is relevant enough, I would look at Reddit. I would also look at building product and tools as marketing is something that comes to mind. So publishing code to GitHub, things that would help other developers or other people from a code-based perspective. There's also tons of technical conferences just in general, depending on what kind of developer you're targeting. And then something that I find is, Rob mentioned integrations earlier. That is huge for a developer. I'm not certain what the product is, but if it's part of a workflow in any kind of way, I would be looking at every single part of the developer workflow that you could possibly integrate with that wouldn't be super competitive, but would provide immense value. That's one of the best ways. And then, of course, when a developer has a great product and they have an amazing product experience, usually one technical customer becomes 3 because they've referred it. So I would also make sure that you've got some kind of growth loop in your product where after you've given them an amazing experience, they will absolutely share with their friends. And developers love talking about their stack and what they're using to accomplish a thing. So that's also how I would kind of think about that mindset. Some of those might not be super helpful, but some of those might. So hopefully it falls in line there.
The other question I would ask myself is, are you actually selling to developers, or are you selling to development managers or people who run teams? Because at 6 to 10K a year, is a developer, do they have the purchasing power, or do they then have to go convince their boss to get it and start thinking about if you have to do that marketing too? So, all right, I think we have time for, we have 2 more questions. We might only get through one, given that we have 1 minute. Let's see, I wrote it down somewhere here. Oh, it's from Gene Goikman. He says, if your product is very horizontal, can you suggest some approaches to select groups to target? This be jobs to be done? Is that would you do interviews and go from there?
I'm assuming by horizontal, it means that it can exist in pretty much any team.
Yeah, and I mean, think of Microsoft Word, right? It just can be used by anybody, or Google Docs versus if I built Google Docs for therapists,
Yeah, totally. I've got a client that's kind of like that. Okay, so if it is for any team, or it can be in pretty much any context, I think the first step is obviously defining the context. So yes, jobs to be done. I would absolutely start there. I think that the second thing is when you do identify the teams, or maybe the certain situations in which this product applies, and maybe even different industries or verticals. The goal isn't really necessarily to feel like you have to be in every single one of those all at once. The goal is really to identify the patterns over time and to run tests against those patterns that you identify. So I've got a client that is in the project management space, and as you can imagine, that applies to just about every business possible, in theory. The reality is that there's really only a few kinds of mindsets and approaches that make someone a great customer. And from there, as we start seeing an influx of a certain kind of team and/or into a vertical, we build campaigns and test that as we receive it and as we learn from it. And over time, it ends up being this like really scaled out approach. But definitely don't feel like you need to boil an ocean. I would try to target the mindset and the context first, and follow the patterns over time, and see if you start to get if you see like a very big swell of something. So if you get a bunch of marketers, in B2B SaaS companies versus a bunch of therapists, on the other end, I think it's elastic. The key would just be to notice patterns and trends over time, and don't feel like you need to boil the ocean.
Very nice. Thank you so much, Asia, for taking 30 minutes to hang out with us today. Asia is Asia Matos, Matos, on Twitter, and you can find out more about what she does at demandmaven.io. Thanks
Thank
again,
you so
Asia.
much for having me. Yes, this is awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was super fun. Take us out, producer Xander. Normally the theme song starts rolling right here. There we go. It's the microphone theme song.
Nice. So fancy. I love it.
So, folks, we'll be back on Thursday, same time, same place, with Nate Grahek. He's going to be talking, man, Nate knows video. He's going to be, title that he gave is MVP Video Production 101. I think about it like how to be really good at video without having to be an expert, and how to get kind of a minimum viable setup. If you're into video, even if you know what you're doing, I'd recommend that you come check it out.